Imagine you own a gold mine. Every single day, trucks pull out your land, dig out the gold, and drive away. You watch them leave every day. By the end of the month, your bank account is almost empty. That's not a metaphor. That is the economic reality of an entire continent. Africa sits on top of the largest collection of natural resources on this planet. Gold, diamonds, oil, cobalt, the minerals inside every smartphone, every electric car, every battery in the modern world. By every logical measure, Africa should be the wealthiest place on earth. But it's not. And today, we are going to find out exactly why. Let me show you something that should disturb you. Africa holds 30% of the entire world's mineral reserves. 60% of the world's uncultivated farmland, land that could feed billions, sits in Africa. Africa produces more than 40% of the world's gold. The Democratic Republic of Congo alone produces over 70% of the world's cobalt. The mineral that makes your phone battery work. The mineral that powers electric vehicles. The mineral that the entire green energy revolution depends on. And yet, Africa accounts for less than 3% of global GDP. Less than 3%. These numbers should not exist in the same world, but they do. And that gap between what Africa has and what Africa earns is not an accident. It is the result of a system that was built deliberately, maintained quietly, and is still running today. But to understand the present, we need to go back. When European powers colonized Africa in 1900, the first thing they did was not build schools. It was not build hospitals. It was not invest in African communities. The first thing they built was infrastructure. But here's what most people miss about the infrastructure. The roads were not built to connect African cities to each other. They were built to connect mines to ports. The railways were not built to move African people. They were built to move African resources out of the continent as fast as possible. Every bridge, every road, every railway line pointed in one direction. Outward, towards the coast, towards the ships, towards Europe. The entire physical structure of colonial Africa was an extraction machine. And when independence came in the 1950s and 1960s, African nations inherited that machine. The roads still led to the ports. The railways still ended at the coast. The colonizers left, but the system they built stayed. Now here is where it gets specific, and this part is important. Take cobalt. Congo produces 70% of the world's supply, but Congo does not manufacture batteries. Congo does not build electric vehicles. Congo does not refine the cobalt into finished products. Congo digs it out of the ground, sells it as raw ore, and watches it leave. That raw cobalt then travels to China, to South Korea, to Japan, where it is processed, refined, turned into battery cells and sold to Tesla, Samsung, Apple, at prices 10 to 20 times higher than what Congo received from it. Congo did all the hard work, the dangerous work, the work that destroys the land and the bodies of people doing it, and captured almost none of the profit. Now look at Nigeria. Nigeria has some of the largest oil reserves in the world, but Nigeria imports refined fuel because it does not have enough fractional fires to process its own crude oil. Nigeria pumps oil out of its ground, ships it abroad to be refined, then buys it back as petrol, and pays more for it than the original crude was worth. Ghana grows cocoa for the majority of the world's chocolate. Walk into any supermarket in Europe and look at the chocolate. Swiss chocolate, Belgian chocolate, British chocolate. Almost none of it says Ghanaian chocolate, because Ghana shows the work of pain. The Swiss and Belgian companies buy it, process it, brand it, market it, and capture 80 to 90% of the final value. That pattern is the same. Africa provides the raw materials. The world provides the processing, the branding, and the profit. This is called the raw material trap, and it's one of the most powerful economic forces keeping African nations from building rural. After independence, African governments faced a serious problem. They needed money to build schools, to build hospitals, to build governments from scratch, to develop the industries that colonialism never had to grow. So they borrowed, primarily from Western institutions like the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, foreign commercial banks, and the loans came with conditions. These conditions were called structured settlement programs, and they went something like this. You want the loan? Then cut government spending, privatize your state companies, remove subsidies, and open new market to find competition. African governments desperate for capital agreed. But what happened next was predicted to anyone paying attention. Lock industries, too young, too unfunded, too new to compete, collapsed against cheaper foreign imports flooding. Government spending cuts meant fewer teachers, fewer nurses, fewer investments in the people who need it most. And the privatization of state companies meant that the most valuable national assets were sold, often at low prices, to foreign corporations. In many African countries, the amount spent to paying debt interest exceeded the amount spent on healthcare and education company. The wealth was not staying, it was being redirected systematically, legally. But I want to tell you something that almost never makes it into mainstream discussions about African poverty. Many wealthy nations place higher tariffs, higher taxes on processed African goods than raw materials. Let me explain what that means in practice. If Ghana exports local cocoa beans to you, the import tax is low, so almost nothing. But if Ghana exports finished chocolate, processed, packaged, ready to sell, the import tax jumps significantly. Why this? Because finished chocolate competes with European chocolate companies, and raw cocoa beans do not. The system is designed through trade agreements written by wealthy nations to ensure that Africa keeps selling raw and keeps buying finished. It's not written anywhere that Africa must stay poor, but the rules of global trade function as a ceiling on African industrialization, a ceiling on African value addition, a ceiling on African wealth. And this ceiling was not built by accident. It was built by the same powers that constructed the extraction model in the first place. But here's where the story changes. Because Africa is not sitting still, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo have recently passed laws restricting the export of raw lithium and cobalt. No more selling raw ore. If you want our minerals, you process them here, on African soil, and you employ African workers to do it. The African Continental Free Trade Area, known as AfCFTA, is now the largest free trade zone on the planet by number of participating countries. Its entire purpose is to build trade between African nations, so the continent stops depending entirely on selling to the outside world and starts building wealth internally. Rwanda is building one of the most ambitious technology sectors in the developing world. Ethiopia is growing the manufacturing base, and Kenya's tech startup ecosystem is attracting global investments. The extraction model is being challenged, slowly, imperfectly, against the enormous business from powerful interests who benefit from things staying exactly as they are. But deliberately, consciously, and with growing momentum. So let me bring this back to where we started. The man watching the tracks live his gold mine every day. Africa is not poor because it lacks resources. Africa is not poor because its people lack intelligence or ambition or capability. Africa is constrained by infrastructure to extract, by debt mechanisms that redirect capital outward, by trade rules that punish processing, and by a global financial system whose architecture was designed by the very powers that colonized the economy in the first place. Understanding that system is not about anger. It's not about blame. It's about seeing clearly. Because you cannot change what you cannot see. And that is exactly why this channel exists. So if this video made you look at something familiar in a completely different way, subscribe. Because this is just a start. This is the kind of information that should not stay hidden.